Everyone thinks they knew the moment that shocked television forever, but few truly understand just how bold it really was. The scene everyone talks about comes from the I Love Lucy episode titled Lucy is Enceinte, which aired in 1952. On the surface, it feels simple, almost ordinary by today's standards. But in that moment, everything changed. In the episode, Lucy Ricardo, brought to life by the brilliant Lucille Ball, reveals that she is going to have a baby. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with anything shocking by modern standards, just a quiet, emotional realization that she is expecting. But here's the part most people don't realize. Back in the early 1950s, television was tightly controlled. Networks had strict rules about what could and could not be shown. Even married couples were rarely portrayed with any real intimacy. And the word pregnant? That word was considered far too inappropriate for broadcast. So instead, the show carefully used the word expecting. Think about that for a second. A real married woman playing a married character, having a baby with her real-life husband, Desi Arnaz, and yet the show still had to tiptoe around the language like it was something forbidden. But what made the scene unforgettable wasn't just the controversy. It was the emotion. The way Lucy processed the news, the way it brought vulnerability, warmth, and real-life truth into millions of living rooms. Audiences didn't reject it, they connected to it. And in that quiet, groundbreaking moment, television took one of its first steps toward becoming something real. Why it was so shocking? What made this moment so shocking wasn't just what was shown, it was everything television refused to show at the time. To understand it, you have to step back into the world of the early 1950s. Back then, TV wasn't the bold, open space we know today. It was carefully controlled, polished, and above all, censored. Networks followed strict moral guidelines, and anything even slightly sensitive was either softened or completely erased. On I Love Lucy, this created a strange reality. The word pregnant? Completely off limits. It was considered too improper, too direct for family audiences sitting around their black and white televisions. So instead, when Lucy Ricardo prepared to become a mother, the show used a softer, safer word, expecting. Even that was pushing boundaries. And it didn't stop there. At the time, married couples were rarely shown talking about childbirth at all. These were real-life experiences, yet television treated them like secrets. Even more surprising, husbands and wives were often shown sleeping in separate beds on screen. That's how strict things were. The idea of openly discussing a baby, something that comes from marriage, felt almost rebellious. But here's where everything flips. Instead of turning viewers away, the episode pulled them in. Millions tuned in, curious, surprised, and deeply connected to what they were seeing. It wasn't just another storyline, it felt real, and that's what made it powerful. Despite all the restrictions, or maybe because of them, the episode became one of the most watched moments in television history. It proved something the networks didn't expect. Audiences were ready for honesty, even if television wasn't. Did it get the show canceled? So did this controversial moment actually get I Love Lucy canceled? Not even close. In fact, it did the exact opposite. At a time when network executives were nervous, when censorship rules were tight, and when even a single word could spark outrage, many expected backlash. They thought audiences might reject the episode, or that sponsors would pull away. But what happened next shocked everyone. The episode became a massive success. Viewers didn't turn the channel, they leaned in. Families gathered around their televisions, fully invested in Lucy Ricardo's journey. The story felt human, relatable, and honest in a way TV rarely dared to be at the time. And the ratings? They soared. The episode attracted tens of millions of viewers, making it one of the most watched broadcasts in television history. Instead of controversy destroying the show, it turned it into something even bigger, a cultural phenomenon. But the impact didn't stop there. By carefully introducing such a bold storyline, I Love Lucy quietly pushed the boundaries of what television could show. It proved that audiences were ready for real-life topics, even if networks were hesitant to embrace them. And because of that, the doors began to open. Writers became a little braver. Stories became a little more real. Television slowly started to evolve. As for the show itself, It didn't fade away after the episode. It continued to thrive, entertain, and dominate the airwaves all the way until 1957, leaving behind a legacy that would influence generations of sitcoms to come. So no, this moment didn't end I Love Lucy. It helped make it unforgettable. The real risky moment. But if there was a moment that truly felt risky, it wasn't just the announcement, it was what came after. As the story continued on I Love Lucy, audiences began to see something television had never really shown before: Lucy Ricardo, visibly pregnant. Now, that might not sound like a big deal today, but back then, it was walking a very fine line. The network was still cautious. The rules hadn't changed overnight. So instead of fully embracing the reality, the show had to get creative. Cameras were carefully positioned to avoid showing Lucy's full body too clearly. Scenes were framed in ways that kept attention on her face, her expressions, her emotions, anything but her growing belly. And the costumes? They were designed with precision. Loose dresses, layered fabrics, clever tailoring. Everything worked together to hide as much as possible while still telling the story. It was a delicate balance between showing the truth and not showing too much. But here's what makes this moment so powerful. Even with all the limitations, audiences understood exactly what was happening. They saw Lucy's journey, they felt it, and instead of rejecting it, they embraced it. In fact, they loved it. Because for the first time, television was reflecting something real, something millions of families experienced, but rarely saw represented on screen. And without making a loud statement, without breaking the rules outright, I Love Lucy did something quietly revolutionary. It normalized pregnancy on television, not through bold defiance, but through subtle storytelling. And sometimes, those are the moments that change everything.
Why people think it was banned? Over the years, a strange story began to spread that I Love Lucy was somehow banned or nearly taken off the air because of that pregnancy storyline. But that's not exactly what happened. So why do so many people believe it? It comes down to how shocking the moment felt at the time. In the early 1950s, television was built on strict rules and careful presentation. Shows avoided anything that might feel too real, too personal, or too controversial. So when Lucy Ricardo's pregnancy became part of the story, it didn't just feel new, it felt almost rebellious. To audiences back then, it was scandalous. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it broke an unspoken rule. It brought something deeply human into a space that had always kept things safe and distant. And then there were the censorship rules. Networks were extremely cautious, constantly reviewing scripts, changing dialogue, and making sure nothing crossed the line. The fact that the show even got close to that line made it seem like it was doing something dangerous, something that could get it shut down at any moment. But the biggest reason the myth stuck? Reality. Lucille Ball was actually pregnant in real life, and instead of hiding it completely, the show chose to write it into the story. That was almost unheard of at the time. To viewers, it blurred the line between fiction and reality in a way television rarely did. And when something feels that bold, that different, that ahead of its time, people start to remember it as something even bigger, not just controversial, but almost forbidden. And that's how the legend was born. The bottom line. So what's the real truth behind the story everyone keeps repeating? Here's the bottom line. There was no single scene that took I Love Lucy off the air. No sudden cancellation, no dramatic shutdown, no moment where everything came crashing down because the show went too far. In fact, the opposite is true. What many people believed would destroy the show ended up defining it. When Lucy Ricardo's pregnancy became part of the storyline, mirroring the real-life experience of Lucille Ball, it didn't break television, it changed it. At a time when networks were cautious and rules were strict, this storyline quietly pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. It proved that audiences weren't as fragile as executives feared. People didn't want everything softened and hidden, they wanted stories that felt real, honest, and human. And that single shift in perspective, it opened the door. After I Love Lucy, television slowly began to evolve. Writers started exploring deeper, more personal topics. Characters became more relatable. Storylines began to reflect real life instead of avoiding it. What once felt controversial became normal, and what once seemed risky became necessary. That's why this moment still matters today, not because it almost ended a show, but because it helped shape an entire industry. It showed that television could grow, that it could take risks, that it could connect with audiences on a deeper level. So no, I Love Lucy wasn't taken off the air. It made history, and in doing so, it changed television forever.